everyone, and welcome to my kitchen. My name is Hannah, and I am a nutrition educator with Cornell Cooperative Extension of Jefferson County. And today is another video in our series, What Can I Cook With?, where I take community suggestions for those ingredients that you need a little bit more inspiration around and show you some different things that you can cook with them. So today is actually the first video in a new series, part of the same deal, but we're going to be looking at cooking seasonal produce. So each week I'm going to be showing you a different type of seasonal produce. So if you're in northern New York, you'll be seeing it come into our farmers market about the same time that I'm cooking with it. Or if you're in the rest of the country, you may have already seen these coming through. So today's first ingredient is going to be the beautiful zucchini. So this is the time where zucchini is very, very plentiful. You might be seeing it again in the farmers markets and CSA boxes in your own backyard. And it's a really great versatile ingredient. So I love chopping it up into stir fries. But today I'm going to be showing you a way that you can make it to replace your noodles. And that is a zoodle, zucchini noodle. You might also see other variations that are made with sweet potatoes, sometimes called swoodles, or carrots, maybe koodles, but I'm not sure if those actually have any other names. So there's a lot of ways that you can turn vegetables into noodles to get a little extra vegetables in your day, because who doesn't need more of those? So I'm going to show you a couple different methods for making these into noodles, and then I'll go ahead and introduce our recipe for today. Go ahead and move forward a little bit. All right, and you'll see I also have the bottom end of a yellow summer squash. You can use this as well. These are also coming into season. So method one for kind of making more spaghetti-like noodles is you can use what's called a spiralizer. So I just have a little handheld one. I like it because it doesn't take up a lot of space in my kitchen. And it comes out with noodles pretty easily. So with these, you just do this nice little crank and twist it through, and you'll see you get kind of these thicker zoodles. Another way that you can use zucchini as a noodle replacement is in lasagna, which I really enjoy doing because I always have a hard time with the boiling those lasagna noodles and getting them right and then taking them out and that whole process. So with zucchini, all you do is you take off the top and the bottom, and then you cut it into thin planks, so the size of and thickness of noodles about. And you just layer those in exactly as you would lasagna noodles. And you can see the one downside about using this is if it gets too thick, it doesn't twirl very well. So I'm going to go ahead and start from the other end. And that's pretty good because sometimes you will have to cut your noodles if it comes off in one continuous piece. It'll be too long. Just go in. So yeah, again, back to the lasagna. Just subbing those in for normal lasagna noodles, cooking it the same as you would normally. Depending on how thick you cut your zucchini pieces, you might have to cook it, an extra 5 to 10 minutes. And you can tell whether it's cooked by poking it with a knife and seeing if it's al dente or not. Okay. So we're coming through, and you will notice that I did leave the skin on. This helps make zoodles that have a little more texture. Sometimes the inner ones can get a little bit mushier because that's where the seeds are. So if you are able to leave the skin on, it holds it together more. You do just want to make sure that you give it a good wash or a scrub. And if there's any kind of parts that look like the skin is broken or something, you will just cut those off. So here, I've got my big pile of zoodles there. And you do get left with some pieces. I usually just chop those up, and so this is like the core that goes through. I usually put these aside, and I'll throw them into my next stir fry, or in the case of today's dish, I'm just going to add them in. And the rest of this, you can just go ahead and give a quick chop, maybe make some moons. And then I'm just going to give all these a chop in half. Okay, and then the other method that you can use if you don't want to go out and get another kitchen gadget is you can just use a regular vegetable peeler. And so this will actually give you more of a pappardelle style noodle which are those thick, wide ones. So you can see like this. These are really great for using in kind of heftier sauces. So if you think of like a bolognese or a sauce that has kind of like a meatier, a thicker, chunkier texture, these hold up really well to that because they can get really coated in sauce and they don't kind of break apart when you have that thicker sauce. So I'm just rotating around. The one downside of this is, again, you might get some pieces that are mostly the inside and there's not a lot of skin on them. And so those ones might kind of end up a little bit mushier. We'll just get a little pile like this. And again, the center where the seeds are, I would just chop it up and add it to another dish. You can freeze them and add it into like a stir fry later on when you make it. So I'm going to set that one aside for later use. If you have a lot of patience, you could also do the method where you cut your zucchini into the planks like you would lasagna and then cut them into strips like spaghetti. That I feel like takes a little bit too much time and patience, but if you can do it, more power to you. Great, so over here, I already spiralized some of my noodles that I'll be using today. I have some pappardelle in there as well, which I will be saving for a different dish. But I just like to put it, it's on a cutting board on top, or it's on a clean dish towel on top of a cutting board. This will help absorb some of the moisture. So there is a lot of water in zucchini and squashes. So it can get a little bit mushy if there's a lot of residual water. So drying it out will just help keep it from getting too mushy. And I'll show you some different tips later on that will also help prevent it from getting too mushy. So I'm just going to let these chill on top of this towel for a little bit. And I'm going to tell you about what we're making today. So today we are making a pad thai inspired noodle dish using our zoodles instead of more traditional rice noodles. I'm also going to be using kind of an amalgamation of some produce that I have around the house, some of it that's in season, to make a really delicious dish and very veggie forward, which I'm pretty happy about on this Meatless Monday. So over here, I've got my pot. I'm going to turn it on and start the oil heating. So I've only got about 2 teaspoons of oil in here. I don't want a whole lot. I don't want it to be like frying anything that I'm putting in there. I just want it to be enough that things won't stick and burn. So this is going to get heated up. Once the oil starts running around my pan more easily, I'm going to add in some chopped onion. And then I'm going to go ahead and get started on the sauce that will go on top of the noodles. Let's go ahead and test this. Yep, so you can see how easily it runs down the pan. It looks pretty shimmery. So let me add in my onions and give it a good stir. And please, if you have any questions about cooking with zoodles or anything else, please feel free to drop it in the chat there. I am keeping an eye on it right now, and I will be happy to answer any questions you have live. So just mixing it around, and I'm going to go ahead and let it cook on medium-high heat. All right. So while that's cooking up a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and make my pad thai sauce. So in this big measuring cup, I have 3 tablespoons of water. I'm going to add in 1 tablespoon of brown sugar. This adds a nice little bit of sweetness. So 1 tablespoon. I like the brown sugar over the white sugar. It gives it more depth of flavor, a little bit more complex. 3 tablespoons of tomato paste. So again, most tomato paste, because it is so concentrated, is very low in sodium. So this is only 1% of your daily sodium, which is great. We want things in general to be under 10% for it to be considered kind of a lower source. And again, I know I talk about this in pretty much every one of these videos, but we do want to reduce our sodium intake because too much sodium is linked to heart disease and high blood pressure. So 3 tablespoons here. Actually, let me grab a little spoon. Scoop it out. 2. And 3. So I like getting these larger cans of tomato paste. This one's about 12 ounces. I like getting those as opposed to the smaller pieces because I do use it fairly regularly. So because there's still quite a bit in here, I'm going to transfer it to an airtight container and just leave it in my fridge. And then you can add little bits to your tomato sauces to punch them up. All right, I'm just stirring this around again so it doesn't burn. Okay, and then to here, I'm going to add in 3 tablespoons of rice vinegar. Let me grab a half tablespoon. I think I do that every time I get rid of a measuring implement before I'm ready. So 6 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And so again, you can get the sodium-free versions of your rice vinegar. I also like looking for the sugar-free version as well. So I prefer to get, if I'm going to have sugar, added sugar, I like to get it from another source rather than kind of like hidden in ingredients that aren't going to satisfy my sweet tooth. Okay, just mixing this up, and then I'm going to need 1/4 cup of lime juice. So looking again, 100% lime juice, that means that there's not going to be any added sugar in there. Oh, perfect amount. Alternatively, you could squeeze the limes yourself. I think it's just easier for me to have it pre-squeezed. And then 1/4 cup of some reduced sodium soy sauce. Again, sodium or soy sauce is a really high source of sodium usually because sodium is usually added like as a preservative and to give flavor. So try to get the reduced sodium version. You could also look for liquid aminos. Those can sub in for sodium or soy sauce and often have lower sodium. And then I'm just going to add in a little bit of sriracha. I like this. I like things spicy, but you can obviously omit it. I'm just going to give it a little, like a generous squirt or 2. Perfect. And just give this a good mix. So the method we will be using to cook the zoodles today is a pan frying method. The great thing about zoodles is you don't really need to cook them that long. It just is more about a texture. So some folks do prefer to eat them raw, to throw them into a spaghetti sauce at the end, or to throw your sauce on top to kind of gently warm them up. We'll be frying them over medium heat. This will help them stay al dente, but get warm all the way through and meld with all of our flavors that we'll be using. Okay. So, this is a good stir. And I'm realizing I'm not quite sure where I put my garlic, so let me go grab it. So we need 3 cloves of minced garlic. Not sure if I've shown this on here, but I use a similar method to the way I learned to cut an onion, which is kind of do these lines where ideally they're all connected by the root. Being very careful, going right down the center. You could use a smaller knife if that made you more comfortable. And then just getting kind of these loose pieces. Since these garlics are going to be cooked fairly well through, we're putting them towards the beginning of the cooking process. I'm not worried about there being huge chunks because they aren't going to stay as kind of raw and spicy as they are. They'll cook and mellow out. Right. And one more. Smushing it sometimes helps. Take the paper off. I don't like smushing it too much because that can let some of the juices really run through and escape, and I want to make sure that those are retained in the garlic, so it brings it to my dish and not to my cutting board. So some other methods for cooking the zucchini to prevent it from getting watery, but if you do want it, cooked through and not just kind of warmed up, is an oven method that I just recently learned about. So in an oven that's heated to 350 degrees, you add in your zoodles on a large sheet pan. So in general, when we're roasting vegetables, we want to avoid crowding them in the pan. We want to give them enough space so that they roast and get a nice crispy outside and not steam, which is what happens when they're close together on the pan. So the same is with the zoodles. We want them to be spread out enough. And this helps the water evaporate so they don't get that mushiness. And then you can add the sauce on top or put them into a pasta salad, whatever you are planning on using them for. Okay. Well, my onions are nice and translucent. Let me see if I can hold it up for you to see. So if you can see, nice and translucent. Some of them are getting a bit charred, which will bring some extra flavors. My garlic, I can smell it, but I don't want it to burn. So I'm going to move on to the next step now. Usually when I add garlic, I only cook it kind of by itself for about 30 seconds. And then I'm going to use the rest of those summer squashes and zucchini that I was telling you about. It's just going to be a squashful dish. You could use broccoli if you had it. Bell pepper would be delicious. Whatever you have on hand. And so this is part of the reason that we did not need to add so much oil at the beginning, because as I mentioned, zucchini and squash have a lot of water, and they will start to release that water as they heat up and cook. So some of the other ways that I like to use zucchini are in as a pizza crust. So instead of using a normal flour-based crust, you can grate the zucchini on just a box grater, the biggest holes, put it in a colander or a strainer, and it will need to strain and release all its liquid for about 30 minutes. And every once in a while it's draining, I like to give it a good squeeze because we do want it to be as dry as possible. And so trying to get as much liquid out as possible. So after about that time, you can mix an egg with it. If you are using cheese, you could mix a little bit of Parmesan cheese or some other low-fat cheese. Salt and pepper. Some other herbs are really delicious, like some oregano and basil. Go ahead and mix all those in, crushed red pepper if you like it spicy. And then you just put it onto your pan, whatever pan you're using for the pizza. Make sure you do rub a little bit of oil on it so it doesn't stick. But there's a lot of variations that you can find on the internet. But I think the best ones are going to be the simplest. So pretty much zucchini, egg, and some other flavorings. The egg is kind of acts as a binder and holds it together. If you're vegan, I'm sure you will be able to find a vegan version online. Okay, so those are just going to cook a little bit more. I'm seeing some lumps float to the surface, so I do just want to make sure this is all kind of mixed up. As I mentioned before, it's Meatless Monday, so I'm not adding any meat to this. We will probably have some hard-boiled eggs on top for our protein, but you could absolutely add some cooked chicken, some meat, some tofu would be another great non-meat option. This is also a great dinner if you've had a lot of protein throughout the day and you just want something maybe a little bit lighter. This fits the bill really well. Okay. This is about ready. I'm just waiting for the slices, the half moons of the squash and the zucchini to loosen up, to feel not as hard. So I'm trying to push through one right now and it's pretty sturdy. So we got a little bit of a ways to go. So another thing that I'm going to add to this, just to bring a little bit more color. So we're going to have some orange carrots on the top afterwards to bring some of that beautiful color. And I'm also going to add in some leafy green spinach. So while that's cooking, let me go grab my spinach. So my spinach in my garden is almost out of season now. I just had a tiny little bit, so I'm going to use this just bagged spinach. And I'm going to give it a good slice. So I want to make sure that I get it evenly distributed. I know I've talked about before making sure to balance your textures. I don't want to get a huge bunch of spinach in one bite and none of my other veggies. So I'm just giving this a rough chop. And I'm going to add it almost at the end. So I do want it to cook a little bit. Cooking spinach can help make some of the vitamins more bioavailable, so more easy for our bodies to absorb and to use. So I like cooking it a little bit. You don't want to cook it too much because too much of a good thing is too much. So it could actually, if you cook it too long where it's getting to the point where it's getting kind of brown and mushy, you've likely destroyed a lot of the vitamins that are in there. So I'm just running my knife over it. And again, if you're not worried about staying traditional to the dish, you can adapt it as the season goes on. So we have kind of like an early summer version of this dish right now. Later in the summer, maybe you're using some corn kernels in here, getting those nice and kind of caramelized. Maybe you're putting peas in here. Maybe you're putting green beans. Really, really adaptable. All right, so this is just about there. Let me get my zoodles ready for adding. Oh, the other topping that I wanted to prep to go on after is going to be our green onion. So I like just using a pair of kitchen shears. These are already washed really well. When you're washing green onions, make sure you kind of rinse in all the crevices there. Make sure you rinse the roots out. That way there's no dirt getting transferred. Sometimes you might have to peel off like the outer layer if it feels kind of slimy. And then I'm just going to give it a good snip. And I'm going to use all of the green. And then I'm going to go slightly down into kind of like the lighter green, the whitish part. This part down here is a little bit more spicy. So I don't always like to use it. The greener part is a little bit sweeter. So it really depends on what you're going for. And then I found a neat trick out recently where you stick this in a jar of water and it will regrow itself. So that's really great, especially with green onions. I feel like I use them not very often. And so when I buy them, I don't want them to go to waste. So this is a good way to use it and then be able to regrow it and use it a couple more times. You got to make sure you are just changing out the water frequently and again, still giving it a good wash before you use it. Another way to reduce the food waste is just snip it all up and put it in a bag in the freezer, and then you can add it as needed. Okay, so now I'm getting some nice golden pieces of zucchini. My onions have caramelized even more. So I'm going to go ahead and add in my zoodles. I'm just going to kind of get it in a handful. And you probably saw there was some longer pieces in there. That's why it helps to kind of trim as you go. And then there's a whole bunch of shorter pieces. If you are looking for kind of a dish that is a little more, I guess, put together and doesn't have all these little pieces, you could save these little pieces for a later stir fry. So maybe if you're trying to impress someone with your zoodles, you don't put these in, but that's more about presentation and appearance than it is about flavor or function. So now I'm just mixing them all together. I'm also going to add in some of my sauce right now. So I'm not going to add it in all at once because it doesn't necessarily need all this. I'm only going to add about 1/3 of a cup. So I think I've got 1 cup right now. I'm going to go down to 2/3. Give it a good mix. You might need to turn it down a little bit at this point. We don't want the sauce burning. I think the little pieces of the zoodles are a little bit messier too, more likely to fling out of your pan, so just be aware. Okay. It's looking a little bit dry, and I know that when I've made this before, I usually add a little bit more than that 1/3 of a cup. That's just a good place to start. And then again, you can save it for your next batch. Make an individual version. And you can make this recipe with other noodles as well that aren't zoodles. You would just add your cooked noodles in at this point. So making sure that you're kind of keeping it over medium-high to medium heat. We don't want it too high, but we also don't want it so low that it's just kind of sitting in the pan. We want the heat to help it evaporate a little bit, any of that excess moisture. Okay, and I can tell by stirring it, the noodles are moving really easily around my stirring utensil. It really only takes a couple minutes to get them cooked. So now at this point, you could go ahead and give it a good taste. Make sure that the spice level, the sauce level is all to your preference. And I'm going to go ahead and add in my chopped spinach so it gets a little bit cooked. Awesome. So again, some bell pepper or broccoli would look really beautiful in here as well. Maybe get something that's more of an orange or a red color. So you got kind of a lot of greens and yellows. And then of course we'll sprinkle some carrots over the top. Go ahead and turn this off I don't want my carrots really to get cooked, but I want them to stay crispy and fresh. And this was one whole grated carrot. You might change your preferences based on the amount you want to use, the amount you have available. I'm just going to go ahead and mix it through a little bit. And then the green onions, I will let each person add to their own as they serve it. Let me put this up. I was desperately scanning for my pot holder because I knew I brought it over here. So this is what it looks like. You've got a beautiful veggie forward dish. It is a great side, and it's also a great main dish. Just again, if you, unless you are looking for a lighter dinner, I would recommend adding some sort of protein to it. So getting half of your plate, your veggies here, and then having a good source of lean protein. My favorite for this is tofu or eggs. So if you have a chicken of some sort, chopped chicken, it would be really good as well. Again, thank you so much for joining me today and cooking some pad thai inspired zoodles. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time saying that out loud. I think it might be the zoodles throwing me off. But if you have any other seasonal ingredients or vegetables, it doesn't have to be seasonal, but vegetables that you are looking for some more inspiration around, maybe you want some different recipes, feel free to let us know. You can either send us a Facebook message at Cornell Cooperative Extension of Jefferson County on Facebook, or you can leave me a comment section here. If you're interested in more cooking events, nutrition events, really we have a broad range of events that aren't necessarily even nutrition related, but check us out at Cornell Cooperative Extension of Jefferson County at our webpage or on Facebook. And you can see a whole list of all the events we have going on. Thank you so much for joining me and have a fantastic rest of your day.